Seems to be a lot of reports recently about the government changing its plans. Of course, these changes are always given a positive spin. The government has been listening to concerns expressed by whoever. But there was one that was particularly notable recently, and it involves MTD, the plans that the government had for making tax digital. These have now been amended and significantly delayed. At the end of today's session, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but at this stage, I'm just going to ask if the government has in fact shot itself in the foot. So, what have the new rules for IR35 got to do with making tax digital? They seem on the face of it to be unconnected, but there is a link, and it explains various government rethinks. IR35 has been around for many years, and it's something that most people can safely ignore. It was brought in broadly to stop people who were really employed being treated as self-employed, perhaps working through their own company. As a piece of legislation, it's been pretty ineffective. Then changes were introduced from April this year, and from that date, public sector bodies had to decide if a contractor was employed or self-employed, and if they got it wrong, they were liable. As a result, most contractors working for public sector bodies found themselves on the payroll, and their take-home earnings reduced significantly. These contractors found themselves being taxed as employees rather than the more tax-efficient way of working through their own companies and receiving dividends. Unfortunately, even though they paid tax like an employee, they do not get the statutory rights of being an employee, and for all other purposes are still effectively self-employed. At the moment, the new rules on IR35 only affect public bodies. HMRC have a tool, the Employment Status Service, or ESS, to determine if someone should be put on the payroll or not. And public sector organisations have been playing it safe and using this tool to determine how to treat their contractors. The results, probably predictable to everybody except HMRC and the government. IT contractors have been leaving the public sector because they can earn more after tax in the private sector. So how will the public sector cope with this loss in its resources? I was on Accounting Web recently and came across an article quoting from CW Jobs, an IT jobs board, and this said that 71% of IT contractors have had their income significantly reduced by as much as 30%. 47% say the reforms have forced them to leave, and 83% are heading for the private sector. This makes interesting reading. In another report, I read that 18 IT contractors working on the Revenue's own ESS, Employment Status Service, had downed tools and moved on because of the change. Seems kind of ironic that the very tool that HMRC put out there to determine employment status has been affected by the new policy change and the reactions of its own IT professionals. We can also see that IT contractors willing to stay will be looking to earn more to offset the tax changes. There are also anecdotal reports that salaries for permanent positions for IT professionals are on the increase. So we have a brain drain in the public sector. Questions are being asked about whether governments, and in particular HMRC, can actually deliver big IT projects at the moment. Ones like making tax digital. Even if they can they be delivered on time? And is it going to cost more? And will that put pressure on tax revenues? Will we all have to pay for this? So now we come to my questions that I mentioned earlier. So what was the real reason for delaying making tax digital? We can now see that the government is struggling for resources, partly because of its own actions. Are HMRC and the government being completely honest with us? So I don't think anything really changes there. I'll leave that to you to decide what the answers are. So we are in an era of spin, whether it be making tax digital, Brexit or whatever. As always, it is going to be you and me that have to bear the consequences. I suppose that never changes. I hope you found these comments interesting. As always, if there's anything you want to discuss, please get in touch. I'm Alan Long from the Long Partnership, making life less taxing.